In my previous video about the HBO's The Last of Us, I was talking about how video games and TV shows are two different types of media. Even though modern expensive video games such as The Last of Us tend to be very cinematic and have great acting performances, but they are still more limited in the ways they can deliver the story. If we take The Last of Us specifically, we experience the story only from three characters' points of view: Sarah at the beginning, then most of the game Joel, and Ellie during short period of time while Joel is recovering from his injury. As a result, we follow almost exclusively Joel and Ellie. We experience everything from their perspective. But the adaptation is not limited to this. Yes, some aspects of the game are almost impossible to adapt simply because these two media formats, as I already said, work different ways. Like, you can never recreate the horror of coming across a scary infected person because we do not control the characters in the show. We just watch them from afar and we know that none of them will die. Showrunners Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann understand this too. They also understand what advantages TV show can have when it comes to storytelling. Bill is just a minor character in the game, with no much backstory. From the game we only figure out few things. We know that Bill is gay, he had a boyfriend named Frank, they had a fight, Frank leaves and gets beaten, and at the end Frank just hangs himself. Pretty damn tragic, but not really from our perspective at least. In the show, however, the whole episode is dedicated to Bill and Frank, not exclusively but in most part. Long time feels like its own movie inside of a much bigger story. This is one of the most touching and heartbreaking episodes of any TV show that I have watched. It is amazingly well written and filmed, and it greatly expands the lore of the game in a way that couldn't have been possible in a game for above mentioned reason, which is a limitation to the main character's points of view. The first two episodes were great, no doubt, especially the second one, but the third was almost perfect to me. The episode greatly deviates from the game, but it doesn't really change the overall sequence of events. In both game and show, Joe and Ellie leave Bill's town eventually, on the car and move west. The difference is that Bill is already dead in the show, when Joe and Ellie arrive. I noticed that there are much less scenes with infected in the show, compared to the game. In the third episode, Joe and Ellie absolutely do not encounter any infected people on their way. Almost don't encounter, if we don't count the stalker in the basement. They just take the car and leave. Meanwhile, in the game, this whole section is filled with infected, especially the school where we meet a bloater for the first time. I understand why Mazin and Druckmann use infected less in the show. The one reason is from the technical standpoint. HBO budget is big, obviously, but it's still limited, considering that one season is probably over 10 hours of content. Another reason is that, as I said before, recreate the horror is practically impossible in a show format. So instead we see the expansion of the characters' stories and arcs. We spent much more time with Sarah in the first episode, then with Tess, and now with Bill and Frank. I'm sure we'll get much more of Sam and Henry in the future episodes. The show doesn't want to be a copy of the game, but rather recreation, but from a different angle. And it works indeed. It absolutely works. So far, Mazin and Druckmann managed to avoid most of the problems related to perception of the same story told from a different media format by using the advantages that cinematography has, and using these advantages very well. I didn't think I would say it really, but this particular part, Bill's town, is even better executed in the show than in the game. It has much more emotional weight, just like Sarah's death. When I heard about the HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us, I thought that the game was already cinematic enough and it didn't really need an adaptation. But watching the show, I realized that I was mistaken, because in the right hands anything can be made. Anyway, the third episode is my favorite so far. I also listened to the official podcasts, and it made me understand the showrunners, their decisions, and the changes they made much better. It opened my eyes on the many aspects of the adaptation that were overlooked before. Can't wait to see what is prepared next for us. Also, the second season has been officially confirmed, which is great, of course. I can only imagine what Druckmann and Mason are capable of doing with that material.